I swear they have a damn heart-to-heart every freaking episode. I'm like,
Every time. It's always about the same thing too.
can y'all just figure it out? Like, damn.
Hi everyone. Welcome back to the Booked on Fantasy podcast. We are two best friends who love all things fantasy. On this podcast, we will explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. We are continuing right along with our dragon coverage, and today is all about Season 1, Episode 3. The purpose of our House of the Dragon episodes is to recap and analyze all of Season 1 in preparation for the release of Season 2. Season 2 is set to release June 16th, so we will be posting one podcast episode each week dedicated to each episode in Season 1 of House of the Dragon. I am honestly ready to just jump right in because, per usual, there was a lot to unpack. And this was actually the first time that we had a time jump so far in the episodes as well. So I thought that was pretty notable. I think they skipped ahead like 3 years. But yeah, lots to talk about regarding that. So we'll keep this intro short. But as a quick reminder, we will be discussing everything from House of the Dragon Season 1, but we may point to other events that happen in other episodes as well, because this is a TV series that both Addison and I have watched previously. If you have not watched House of the Dragon, again, truly awesome show. You should definitely pause here, go watch it, and then come back for our analysis, because we'll be right here waiting for you. And then furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have explicit conversations. Explicit language may be used, so please be mindful of that and maybe put on some headphones first. All right, as far as housekeeping goes, we are continuing our episodes of Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series as well. As of now, we have released 4 episodes which cover chapters 1 through 30. So you've got plenty of content to keep you entertained. If you are brand new to the series like us, then perfect. Let's be both besties. And if you're a seasoned reader, then also welcome. In either case, we have a full summary recap of the designated chapters and a juicy analysis for you to follow along with. So let's get this episode started. Our House of the Dragon episodes will likely be on the shorter side, but no promises on that. Each of these episodes will consist of a recap of the key events, followed by an analysis where we pick apart notable conversations, events, or other observations. Then we will have a mini trial in our fantasy court of law to decide which team has enough evidence to support their claim to the Iron Throne. And then, of course, last but not least, we will share our favorite moments from the episode as well. And now, Addison, please take it away with the episode recap.
We open on yet another gruesome scene of the crab feeder nailing his victim to a post to be eaten by carnivorous crabs. But wait, is that a fucking dragon? It sure is. Prince Damon to the rescue, except for that one guy from the opening scene. Oops. We flash forward roughly 3 years. Our girl Alicent was busy. And that time she marries Viserys, gets pregnant, gives birth, and gets pregnant again. It is Aegon's second name day, which is really just a fancy way of saying birthday. Everyone is preparing to go to the hunt, which is a 3-day celebration in honor of Aegon. But someone is missing from the revelry. Surprise, surprise, it's our girl Rhaenyra. This seems to greatly agitate King Viserys, so much that he doesn't even care about receiving urgent news from the ongoing conflict over the Stepstones. Alicent goes to find Rhaenyra, and it is immediately obvious there is tension between the two of them. I guess that's reasonable when you consider the fact that her best friend became her stepmom? Yikes. The tensions between Alicent, Viserys, and Rhaenyra continue on the carriage ride to the hunt. During the festivities, Alicent publicly supports Rhaenyra's claim to the throne in a conversation with several important ladies, and Lord Jason Lannister shoots his shot with Rhaenyra, and it is cringe. An outraged Rhaenyra confronts her father, and they get into a public screaming match. Also awkward. Rhaenyra does what any normal 17-year-old would do when they're angry at their dad, jump on a horse and ride off. Luckily for Rhaenyra, her personal guard, Sir Criston Cole, follows after her. The hunt is on, and a rare white stag has been spotted. Meanwhile, back at camp, Jason Lannister is back at it again, but fucks up royally with the king. Afterwards, an irritated Viserys talks to Hightower, and he recommends that Rhaenyra marry her half-brother Aegon. Viserys does not take that well, instead gets drunk as fuck. Lord Strong, a member of the King's Council, once again gives the king the most sage advice, and once again the king ignores him. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra and Sir Criston Cole are camping under the stars for the night, and a wild boar attacks. Rhaenyra goes absolutely feral and stabs it to death. A drunk Viserys tells Alicent of his wavering resolve in naming Rhaenyra as heir instead of Aegon. Gee, wonder if that's going to be important later. The next day of the hunt, it's time for the king to kill the stag, and much to his relief, it is not the fated white stag, because the white stag instead blesses Rhaenyra with its presence. Hightower continues to put pressure on Alicent to urge the king to name Aegon as heir, but instead she ends up convincing Viserys to aid Daemon in the Stepstones. Viserys and Rhaenyra finally have it out in another heart-to-heart. Man, they had these talks every damn episode. You'd think they would have figured out their shit by now. And this time it seems like maybe there's hope. Things finally come to a breaking point in the Stepstones. Tensions are high and mutiny threatens the remainder of the infantry. Daemon gets a missive from the king promising to send aid. Instead of feeling grateful or relieved, in typical Daemon fashion, this angers him. Instead, he decides to go on a suicide mission to take out the crab feeder himself. By some miracle, Daemon not only survives, but is successful in ending the crab feeder. All right, before we get started on the analysis, there are a couple things I want to say about the episode overall as a whole. The first is, as we talked about in the last episode, I want to talk about the title of the episode. The title of this episode is Second of His Name. This is in reference to Viserys and Alicent's son, Aegon. Who is the first Aegon, you may be asking? I did a little research. So, the first Aegon is known as Aegon the Conqueror or Aegon the Dragon. He was the first Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and king on the Iron Throne. The Dragon Lord was founder of the ruling Targaryen dynasty of Westeros. The second Aegon is Viserys and Alicent's firstborn son. Obviously, by naming him Aegon, they are strongly alluding to a very successful and important previous king. The implication to me is being that Aegon could or should be king. So I just wanted to make note of that because I feel like the title episodes can be very telling content-wise or shows some foreshadowing. So I thought that was interesting because obviously Aegon, well, the actual child of Aegon is not very much in this episode, but him as an entity and a play for the crown is a big part of this episode. So the next thing I want to say about this episode is overall there is a lot of symbolism in this episode. We're going to be talking about it, but we are not perfect, and if we miss anything, please comment and let us know. And the last thing I want to say about this episode overall is that it really takes place between two major scenes. The first is the hunt, and the second is the ongoing conflict in the Stepstones. Right away in one of the opening scenes, we are immediately informed about both, and so that's really where our analysis is going to be, is the hunt, the Stepstones. Mm-hmm. So right away in the opening scene, everyone is preparing for the hunt, and King Viserys gets a missive from the Stepstones. Now, I feel that for someone who has not read the books, the ongoing conflict in the Stepstones may be a little confusing. It's not directly clear what the power dynamics are and what players are in play. So I did a little bit of research so I can sort of summarize the conflict and the power dynamics there. So remember from the last episode, Daemon and Lord Corlys decide to take matters into their own hands and engage in conflict in the Stepstones without permission from the king. Okay, just as a recap from the last episode, the Stepstones are a small chain of rocky islands. However, the major sea lanes between the Narrow Sea and the Summer Sea have to pass through the straits between the Stepstones, making them strategically very important for trade, economically, etc. There are free cities, and there is Westeros. Westeros is the Seven Kingdoms. Free cities, I believe there are 9 free cities. 3 of the free cities that are geographically the closest to the Stepstones have formed an alliance called the Triarchy. Apologies if I mispronounce the name. Kragus Drehar, also known as the Crab Feeder, so I'm going to call him that for the rest of the episode to make it a lot easier. The Crab Feeder has named himself Prince Admiral of the Triarchy and is basically in charge of the war effort on behalf of the Triarchy. He continues to attack ships, specifically Lord Corlys's ships, and this is what prompted the conflict. Viserys did not want to intervene. Lord Corlys and Daemon decided to go to war with the Stepstones without the king's blessing. Basically, they were insubordinate. There's been a 3-year time jump in this episode. So during that time, Daemon and Lord Corlys have been in conflict over the Stepstones, but because of their insubordination, many question whether King Viserys should actually aid his brother in the former master of ships. And that brings you up to date on the conflict at present day in this episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was really important information because I noticed that they said that in that first scene, one of the soldiers referred to the crab beater as Prince Drehar. And I was like, he definitely has some kind of established ruling status to some extent, but they never clarify in the episodes themselves what that is specifically. So I think that was good information to have.
Yeah. I think Prince is just a given name. I don't think he's actually royalty in any way. I think he just fancied himself like, I'm going to be Prince of the Stepstones. I don't know. But yeah, so I just wanted to summarize the conflict because it is a little confusing, especially because the free cities really aren't important in House of the Dragon, at least up to date. So
Yeah.
we don't really know a lot about them.
The one note that I had was just the fact that at Aegon's birthday party, Viserys does get news from Tylan that it's becoming quite a problem. And Viserys, again, is still very dismissive of that fact. He's like, it's been 3 years, it can wait another 3 days.
Yes.
But at this point, other people have started to really take notice of it because it's gotten to a point where it is actually a problem now. I think before, when it first occurred, it hadn't had enough of an impact yet for people to be concerned about it. But now, 3 years down the line, they're like, Daemon and Lord Corlys's forces are like, they're at
Getting their asses
they
kicked.
can't. Yeah, they can't do anything. The crab feeder has retreated into the caves. The dragons aren't doing anything. They can't help at all because they're protected from fire and everything. If you don't address this and do something about it, they're going to lose.
Yeah. Viserys cannot find Rhaenyra. He's very irritated by this. And so Alicent, as a way to appease the king, decides to go find Rhaenyra. I also think she just wants to look for her in general, because my impression based on this scene is that Alicent really is trying, that she wants to make a connection with Rhaenyra. And she even tells her it doesn't have to be this way. You know, Viserys wants us to be together like a family. And Rhaenyra is very dismissive of Alicent in this scene. And there is just this tiniest little, I even hate to say power struggle, because I don't really think it's either one of them trying to assert their power. But there's a minstrel and he's playing for Rhaenyra, and Alicent tells him to stop. And Rhaenyra tells the minstrel, as your princess, I command you to stay and keep playing. And then Alicent says, as your queen, I command you to go. And so immediately you're laying out the power dynamic, right? I am the queen, you're the princess. Technically, you have to do what I say, right? I think it's just very small foreshadowing for the future conflict. The other thing that I wanted to note was about Rhaenyra's character. We don't know because we fast forwarded roughly 3 years. But based on that conversation and the way that interaction plays out, it's pretty apparent that Rhaenyra has essentially isolated herself from everyone. She's very bitter. She's very angry. And I feel like she's doing herself a disservice here. She is not thinking strategically. In reality, obviously she needs to process that her father is going to marry her best friend, you know, but at some point you just have to accept that, right? You get over that. And you continue to be friends with Alicent. One, because you love each other and they're good friends. But two, because I feel like if Rhaenyra had kept Alicent in her corner, then it could have avoided a lot of the potential future conflict. Because all throughout this episode, Alicent is a proponent of Rhaenyra's claim to the throne. And if Rhaenyra had found a way to be a little more mature and, I guess, continue to ally herself with Alicent, Alicent probably would have maintained a stronger proponent of Rhaenyra's claim to the throne. What did you think about like their whole dynamic and Rhaenyra's behavior?
Pretty much I agree with everything you just said. And Rhaenyra still is very bitter about everything that happened, which is interesting because Viserys over and over has tried to tell her, I do not have any intention of naming anybody else as heir. But she still very much has this underlying fear that is in fact what's going to happen to her, which is valid because as we see later on, you know, things do happen. But at this time, Viserys has confirmed over and over that he doesn't plan to do that. But Rhaenyra refuses to really accept that. And then I think that fuels her bitterness and therefore her desire to distance herself from the family. But to your point about how it's strategically not the move, I also think she's wasted a lot of opportunity to influence the council and be able to be there and solidify her position as somebody who should be the heir. You know what I mean? And I mean, granted, they didn't give us a lot of information. They skipped 3 years ahead. We don't know how much she was really there. But my impression is that she really hasn't been that involved with anything.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a really good point that you made, that she really could have been winning the council over to her side to support her claim in the future. Yeah.
And then also to the point about Alicent, up until this point, it continues to show that Alicent has really been put in this position of a middleman between the two of them. She went to get Rhaenyra basically because the king was like, where's Rhaenyra? Go find her. But the king himself knows that Rhaenyra probably wouldn't listen to him, as many of their conversations have gone. She's pretty defiant. So he uses Alicent to be that in between. So moving on into the next scene, they're traveling to the location where the hunt will happen. And it's a scene where you have Viserys, Alicent, and Rhaenyra all in a carriage together. It's very awkward. Like nobody's really saying
So
anything.
awkward.
They're all just staring. And you start to see that Viserys is getting very annoyed with Rhaenyra. And they're butting heads because he's like, you would understand the order of everything if you actually chose to participate in what's going on. And that's where she says, nobody's here for me. She kind of explodes. But in that statement, that's where you really notice the true reason for her rebellious attitude. Rhaenyra is ultimately still very hurt by this betrayal of her best friend marrying her father and now having a male heir. I think she can feel the tension between other people around the castle because it's very obvious to the viewer that everybody else, other than Viserys and I think Alicent at this point still definitely supports her as well, or is at least at a minimum not trying to overstep what Viserys has declared. But everybody else, the council members and other people, still do not take her being named heir as a serious thing. And she still feels that. And I think to her, Aegon being born and Alicent's pregnant again, I think it's just this continued verification to Rhaenyra that now there is somebody who can overtake me, and it's solidifying her fear, her worst fear about her being passed over.
Absolutely, I agree.
So moving along, next we cut to a scene where they have now arrived at the hunt, and we are presented in a scene where Alicent and the ladies are all sitting in a circle and they're having a conversation, and the topic of discussion is the stepstones. And more specifically, one of the ladies, Lady Kira, is talking shit about Daemon and the stepstones. Rhaenyra overhears them talking, and Lady Kira asserts, why don't you really know what's going on there? And Rhaenyra says that she hasn't spoken to Daemon in years. And then Lady Kira responds with, since you supplanted him as heir. Alicent steps in and defends Rhaenyra and says, well, Rhaenyra's more suited to the role. She makes a show of good faith, I think, and acknowledges publicly that she still supports the fact that Rhaenyra has been named as the heir and agrees to that. And I do think that truly at this point in time, Alicent does believe that. What did you think about Alicent's comment?
I took it very similarly to you. I think it's genuine belief on her part. And two, I think this is her trying to reach out to Rhaenyra and saying, I'm not here to replace you. That is not my goal. I'm on your side. And trying to do that in a public way to give it a little more gravity.
Yeah, I think so too. And then shortly after that, then Rhaenyra turns and Lady Redwine makes a comment as well. And I just thought that was interesting. Her comment was in support of what Lady Kira said, which indicates that people know what's going on in the Stepstones now. Prior to this, a few years back, it was still kind of the side event that happened and it wasn't given much attention. But now it's become a much bigger conflict. It's spread and many more people within Westeros are aware of what's happening. But I do think that Rhaenyra was surprised. I think even Rhaenyra hadn't realized how bad it had gotten in the Stepstones until she overhears this conversation. The other thing that I thought was interesting about this point is this is where we first meet Larys Strong, and he becomes very important to Alicent later on. And he doesn't have a prominent role on this episode and will not for a few episodes into the season. But I think it's just important to note that he's there. He's always been there in the background, lurking and everything. And it's just evidence of how strategic he has been.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. Honestly, I recognized him, but I kind of forgot how important he becomes later. So I think that was a really good observation. So after this conversation, the hunt continues to progress, and they take King Viserys out to just kind of inspect what's going on and check the progress of the hunt. And the lead huntsman, I'll call him, I don't really know what his position is, but the guy running the hunt tells him that a white stag has been spotted. And he says, before dragons ruled the land, a white stag was a symbol of royalty. And this is important because, well, this entire episode and this entire show is about who should be heir to the throne, right? Who has the most rightful claim to be royalty. And the stag comes up again later with Rhaenyra, which we'll talk about further down in the episode. But Hightower happens to be standing there during this scene, and the gleeful look in his eye when the guy says that, and he says, And on this day of all days, I've never been one for signs and portents, your grace, but if the gods did wish to show their favor. And I mean, I gotta hand it to Hightower. It's a brilliant way to supplant the idea because, I mean, really, he's right. We know that Viserys has always been more prone to superstitions and dreams. Remember the very first episode where he talks of Aegon's dream, and he talks about his dream about bearing a son, wearing the conqueror's crown. So I think Hightower is sort of playing on Viserys's...
It's like insecurity with Viserys. Because I don't know if he can just feel the insecurity that Viserys feels, or maybe he just knows that Viserys is really the only one that supports Rhaenyra as heir, and everybody else generally would side with Hightower's position. And so I think feeling confident that other people would back him, even if it is directly against the king himself and what he stated, he's like, no, I'm just gonna keep putting breadcrumbs in here to get him to change his mind and doubt his decision, basically.
But I mean, it really is a perfect setup for Hightower, right? In general, in that time period, people are more superstitious. Signs and symbols have more meaning. And so to see a white stag on Aegon's name day is kind of, you're like, wow, okay.
Yeah, that's true. So, except that it's ironically hilarious that they're looking for the white stag, and
they don't,
as we see,
surprise, they don't
not
find
for
it.
them. Yeah,
someone else finds it. I wonder
exactly who could it be. Anyways, moving on, back at the party. So now Viserys has seen it. They're still trying to track it, but that was basically just like an update to Viserys saying we're on its tail, we're close to it, we're gonna find it soon. And then back at the party, but as he's sitting there surveying everybody feasting and enjoying their time, Jason Lannister again approaches him and offers him a spear from his house. And basically he says, I give this to you. You can use it to kill the stag today. So basically he's trying to bribe the king to get him to allow him to marry Rhaenyra. And he's like, you can even use the sword of my, or like the spear of my house, and it will be this lovely representation of our houses uniting. And Viserys is just like, no, because he literally tells him, do you think that House Targaryen wants more strength? And he's basically just very pissed at the suggestion that he would make such a good direct statement and be like, well, you weren't really that serious about Rhaenyra being heir, right? Like, clearly this was just temporary. Now she can get married, she'll be well taken care of, she doesn't need to worry about anything. And Viserys is like, no, like, I named her for a reason. Why are you in my business trying to doubt my decision? But it's just another representation of the fact that Viserys is really on his own in his support of Rhaenyra being heir, and there is a lot of tension amongst others in the realm regarding that decision. But he does say, I did not decide to name Rhaenyra as heir on a whim. All the lords of the kingdom would do well to remember that. And I do appreciate that Viserys, again, is still publicly making statements to show that he really does want Rhaenyra as heir and defends her in a public manner to other people.
Yeah, I think that's some more evidence that points to Team Black that Viserys' intent is to name Rhaenyra heir, and he didn't do it just because he didn't have a son. He gave it forethought, and even in the circumstances of which he could have a son, then he would have still named her heir.
Right. And whatever doubts he does have, he keeps those to himself. So I think that it's important. The publicity of it, I think, is very important. So him out loud telling everybody else that this is still my decision, even if privately speaking, he may have some doubts. So
yeah, absolutely. Shortly after the conversation with Jason Lannister, Otto Hightower comes to check on the king, and I think Otto Hightower is trying to read the room, right? And he thinks, oh, a white stag has been seen. I know what I'll do. I'll try to implant the idea that maybe Aegon and Rhaenyra should get married. So Viserys starts out the conversation complaining about Rhaenyra and how she is just being stubborn and won't even consider taking a husband, and specifically in reference to Jason Lannister at that time, because that's who wants to marry Rhaenyra, or who is making their play at that point. And Hightower recommends that she marry Aegon, which, record screech, that is her half-brother. But his argument is that it would solidify concerns about who was named heir, and it would end the ceaseless proposals for Rhaenyra's hand in marriage. Honestly, this is not the worst idea that Hightower has. It's obviously weird because of the age difference, but as we know in this universe, marriage is not for love, okay? It is for a strategic alliance. It is for increasing your reach, your power in your house. And we know that it is canon that is not uncommon for Targaryens to marry within the family. It's to keep the bloodlines pure. It's to keep the connection to the dragon strong. So honestly, it's not a terrible idea. I'm actually genuinely surprised that Viserys did not at least think of this idea on his own or consider it. Maybe he does, but it's never shown in the episode. But it's not the worst idea, to be honest. But Viserys' reaction is pretty much outright dismissal. He laughs at him and is like, no, that's not going to happen. And I have to wonder, why not, honestly, other than he doesn't want to? I don't know. I couldn't really think of a good reason why Viserys rejects that proposal, because it's actually traditionally normal and would resolve basically all issues.
I'm not sure either, but I do wonder if maybe he's almost offended for Rhaenyra, because I think he does want Rhaenyra to get married. He dreams that could be the situation instead of the reality of marriage in this world where oftentimes people are just getting married just for strategic alliance and everything. But he's hopeful that Rhaenyra's marriage will be what he had with Aemma, his first wife. I don't know. It's hard to say.
He definitely wants her to be happy. And he says that I just want you to be happy and have a family.
Right. Moving on. Obviously, this entire hunt celebration has just been nonstop bombardment on Viserys' part of people coming to talk to him about marriage proposals and everything. And Viserys is just over it. He doesn't want to deal with it anymore. But we have one final person who comes in. And in this case, it's Lord Strong. And I think Lord Strong in general has proved to be a very wise councilman. I personally respect everything that he said the most out of anybody else, because he makes good suggestions that make sense strategically. In this conversation, Lord Strong suggests that Sir Laenor, son of the sea snake, Lord Corlys, should actually be the candidate for marriage for Rhaenyra. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, he similarly suggested that Viserys should have married Laena back before he decided to marry Alicent. And I think the reasoning still stands very true. Lord Corlys is a very powerful house. They control the shipping channels. And so economically speaking, it makes a lot of sense for them to be together as well. And then, of course, this suggestion obviously sets us up with foreshadowing for the future, where inevitably it does actually happen for them. I really wish that Lord Strong was Viserys' hand instead of freaking Otto Hightower, but here we are. So
if only things would be a lot better. Well, I think ultimately Lord Strong's greatest strength is that he doesn't have any self-interest in what's going on in the events of the realm. He genuinely is thinking what is best for the crown, what is best for the realm. Whereas Hightower, Lord Corlys, they all have vested interest in other outcomes because of their own personal investments into some of these issues, like Lord Corlys' ships and the Stepstones and Otto Hightower's daughter, so
yeah.
I think that's ultimately one of Lord Strong's biggest strengths. So in the next scene at the hunt, it's later that evening, and Viserys and Alicent, I call it the bonfire scene because they're standing in front of a great big fire. And this is one of the most, I think, loaded conversations of this episode. He, of course, he's a little drunk, and so I think he's sort of speaking a little more freely.
Got loose lips.
Yeah, he does. It's obvious that he's troubled, and so Alicent asks him, what's going on. And he admits to her a couple of things. He admits to her that he named Rhaenyra heir to protect the realm from Daemon. So I thought that was interesting because he's never directly stated what was his final catalyst for motivation in naming her as heir, because he could have waited until he got married to see if he had more kids. He had options, right? So it really was a big momentous thing for him to name Rhaenyra. And so I think a big part of that was he did want to protect the realm from Daemon. The next part of that conversation, he also says, I named her out of love because I no longer believed ... kind of trails off. And so the implication being that he never believed he was going to have a son. And I think this is super, super, super important because this is the first time we see on screen where he lays the foundation for Alicent to waver. Because years later, I'm sure Alicent will be able to recall this conversation and think, Viserys himself said to me that part of the reason why he named her too was because he never thought he was going to have a son. So it was sort of a double win for him. He's like, I'll never have a son, so let me secure the line. But also I could protect the realm from Daemon. But then he goes on and he redescribes the dream he had that he talks about in the first episode of Aemma, that he had a son, a male babe born to him with a conqueror's crown. And now here is Aegon, healthy, alive, well, and really no reason that he couldn't be named heir. And if he had not already named Rhaenyra heir in the past, it would be no question, right? It would have resolved, well, the entire conflict of the show. I feel like this is where we see Viserys really start to doubt himself, because he even says, what if I was wrong? And there's just so much confusion, and you could tell he's wavering, and he really doesn't know if he's made the right choice. And I think this is the first time we see that Viserys really starts to doubt his choice in picking Rhaenyra to heir. Did he make a mistake? Did he make the wrong choice? Should he have waited? And I think we're going to see that doubt continue to grow as time progresses.
Mm-hmm. In the next scene, we are taken back to the hunt site, and this time they actually have caught the stag. However, it is not the white one. It's a plain old brown one, which if they were disappointed in that, they definitely didn't show it. But I took note of that. I was like, not the one you wanted. But I definitely thought that this was kind of a bad omen because of that. Because not only is the stag that Viserys kills not the white one, but he also does not get a clean kill. He has to stab it twice before it finally dies. And I just really hated that scene because the stag was just very clearly in pain. It was very cruel to just watch it. It was crying. And I was like, I don't like this. I don't like watching this.
It seems so unsporting. All these men chase it down, they tie it up, and they're just holding it there as Viserys walks like a sharp-ass spear. It felt really...
it was, like I said, kind of a bad omen, because obviously to me, the fact that he struggled to actually kill it, that seems indicative of pain and misery to come, and that really a hard path awaits moving forward, which it certainly does. So now after that part, however, though, then we see Rhaenyra with Criston Cole separately again. They are sitting overlooking the Kingswood, and they actually end up seeing the white stag. Criston kind of gets this look like, what should we do with it? And Rhaenyra is like, no, leave it. We're not going to do anything with it. And she lets it run off. And so one, I think that's a good omen for her, is that the white stag showed itself and presented in front of them for Rhaenyra and not for Aegon. But also the fact that she was really merciful and she let it live. I thought that was a good sign, and that she recognizes its difference and that it's this unique and beautiful creature. And I think that likely resonates with her own feelings of conflict over wanting to be accepted as a female ruler to the Iron Throne, because she too is non-traditional, very different from what's normally accepted within the realm.
So good, Lorraine. That was such a good parallel.
Oh, also that, we don't have to say much about this. I just want to say that I thought it was really a very powerful scene when she walks back into camp and she's covered in blood and everybody's like looking at her like, what? Like, what the hell happened to you?
So badass. And you can tell she has this little smirk on her face and she's like, what? Say something. Say something.
Yeah.
I want you to, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So
that's funny.
Just a great scene for her.
Yeah, agreed. So the events of the hunt are finally over and we are back at the Red Keep, and we see Alicent in her rooms and her father, Hightower, comes in to have a conversation with her. And yet again, another instance of him putting pressure on her. And I will say at this point, it doesn't feel like subtle manipulation. He's just outright telling her in this scene what you need to do. It's no longer just, oh, go check on the king. It's, this is what you need to do. And I did think it was extremely noteworthy in that conversation that he tells Alicent when she bore a son that she ended 15 years of uncertainty in the realm. And that's a really big thought and a lot of pressure to put on Alicent, because you're basically telling her that she saved the realm from uncertainty and turmoil, because it is a huge issue, right? When any ruler, especially in this universe, does not have a secure heir, it causes a lot of uncertainty, and it always opens the door for conflict, right? Like if Viserys were to suddenly die with no children, multiple people could start making claims and bids for the throne, and it could turn into a war, right? And we see this happen time and time again in our Martin's universe, right?
Yes.
And so he continues to really manipulate and put pressure on her, and he says, didn't you notice how all the men were united in celebrating him? All the men want to unite under Aegon as the heir. And Alicent, even still, I will to give her credit, she pushes back on him, and she says Rhaenyra will be a good queen. We all swore fealty to her, our house included. And Hightower is just like, yeah, but that was before Aegon. And I think Hightower's trying to make Alicent feel better about, well, the events we know are going to happen in the future, right? They all did swore fealty to her, but that was before Aegon. The circumstances were different, so we don't necessarily need to continue to uphold that oath that we took, because the circumstances were different, right? And he outright tells her, you need to guide Viserys towards reason, because he'll never find it on his own. So it's up to Alicent to ensure that Viserys changes the heir and names Aegon heir instead of Rhaenyra. And I think we're going to continue to see in future episodes. Well, I don't think I know. I know we're going to continue to see in future episodes Hightower putting just outright pressure and telling Alicent what to do. And as we know later, Alicent eventually comes to agree to this conclusion, but for now, she is trying to push back, and she still is trying to support Rhaenyra's claim to the Iron Throne.
Yes. I respect Alicent at this point still, and I think that she truly is very much in this middleman position. Pretty much everything about her character is just being forced to do things that other people tell her to do, and she doesn't have a strong ability to do otherwise. And she clearly wants to support Rhaenyra, but there's so much pressure from her father. But I do believe that between Viserys's dream that he tells her by the bonfire, and now Hightower literally being like, no, Aegon needs to be heir. This is how it's supposed to be, and you need to make that happen. I do believe that this is the catalyzing event that causes her to really start to consider that possibility that she should be pushing for Aegon. I don't know that it's completely conscious yet, but I do think that it becomes this subconscious seed that will later on for sure propel her to make a stronger case for Aegon.
That plus the conversation with Viserys in front of the bonfire, those things together kind of had those thoughts bouncing around in your head. Be hard not to come to the conclusion she does. Yeah.
All right. So moving on, we are starting to get closer to the end of the episode, and now they are back from the hunt, and Rhaenyra and Viserys are having a conversation. Well, not even really a conversation. They're essentially arguing and yelling at each other. So
as fathers and teenage daughters do.
Yes. Yep. This seems to be a very popular dynamic for them. But anyways,
every episode.
Yes. So again, the point of discussion is really about Rhaenyra needing to get married and how, as princess, she has a duty to do so. And throughout all of this, we really see Rhaenyra's fear, and Viserys tries to reassure her and tells her over and over that he will not really replace as heir. Because Rhaenyra's like, if I'm already the heir, if I have power, in the end, and I will have this control and everything and be in that position, why do I even need to get married? There's no reason for that to realistically be an issue for me. But he's like, well, I mean, you do need to produce your own heirs too. But this is another instance of them having a conversation in private, right? As we know, much of Viserys's reassurance, it's in a very private situation. But then through that, he does say, you're going to need to get married. However, make it your choice. Go and find someone who you feel is suitable to you. And so I did respect that. I do appreciate that he gave her the option of choosing that rather than picking somebody for her.
I swear they have a damn heart-to-heart every freaking episode. I'm like,
Every time. It's always about the same thing, too.
like, can y'all just figure it out? Like, damn. All right, it's time for my favorite part of the episode, the Shadow Daddy update. What is Daemon Targaryen up to? So for most of this episode, he is not really in it. He is in the Stepstones waging war, not very successfully, but he's still there. And we finally get a look into what's going on there. So we see Lord Corlys and his brother and his sons, and they're all talking about the condition of the conflict and how things are going. It ain't going well for them. Okay, they're dire. The crab feeder continues to keep hiding in caves, so they're not able to use the dragons as effective weapons against them. And Shadow Daddy comes and lands on the dragon looking all cool, and he gets a missive from the king, and immediately starts beating the poor messenger. You know, when you're first watching that, you're like, whoa, 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 what the fuck? So the episode leaves it open for you to think that Viserys actually is not going to send aid. And then cuts to Daemon, and he is rowing to the shore, and you hear Viserys' voiceover, and Viserys says that he will send aid and ships to help the conflict in the Stepstones, which I thought was nice. But I think to Daemon, I think this angers him because he wanted to do it on his own. I think when he initially set out on this path with Corlys, it was to prove himself and to show that he didn't need Viserys' approval and didn't need the aid of the crown to be successful. And here we are 3 years later, and it's not going bad for them. It's going horrifically. They're going to lose. We don't do something soon. And I think he's so angered by this because it's his own personal failing. So Daemon, though, I love this scene. This scene is just from start to finish. It is so great. He grabs the piece of cloth. He's waving the white flag. He kneels and holds his sword. And then one of the crab feeder soldiers comes and takes it. And then surprise! Daemon takes his dagger, he gets his sword, and it's epic, man. He's just running, he's fighting, he's slicing people down, he's dodging arrows. And then you even see him, he takes a couple arrows. And that's when I was like, when I first watched the very first time, I was like, oh my God, Daemon's gonna die. But he didn't. Thank God. Thank God he was okay. He was saved. And Lord Corlys' son appears. Yeah. Lord Corlys' son appears on Dragonback and burns them all. And then cue epic battle scene of everyone fighting. And at the very end of the scene, we see Daemon walking out with the crab feeder's body cut in half, which was really disgusting, by the way. Like, very graphic. But besides the fact that this scene is awesome, it's just really, cinematically is really cool. And it shows that the conflict in the Stepstones is essentially resolved. It's also really important because I feel like this is a very critical scene where it shows that Daemon has earned him a reputation that will allow him to sway men in the future to follow him. Because, as we know, men are preferred rulers, right? And they want men that have proven themselves in battle to be strong of heart and mind and body and will and courage and bravery and all of those things. And this is really a huge show of that for Daemon, right? You could just imagine all the soldiers, going back home and be like, oh, speaking of Lord Daemon, and he win. And there was 100 men he struck down, and the story getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But it is an important turning point for Daemon's character and him kind of coming into his own right. And I think it reinvigorates his own self-confidence that he feels that he could rule, right? I've earned it. I deserve it. I'm powerful. Like, look what I just did. I killed the crab feeder, did I not? So,
yeah. Yeah, that whole scene was really interesting just to watch. But also to credit, something that I've always appreciated about Daemon is that he's always willing to go do the thing that he says he's going to do, right? They knew that this was like a last ditch effort. The army in general was very demoralized at this point because it's not going well. They're close to losing. And then Daemon makes the decision to be like, no, we're ending this now. Daemon really steps up and he backs it up with the action. He's the one who acts as the bait and takes that risk. And then ultimately he kills the crab feeder himself. All right. So now that we have her analysis out of the way and we are at the end of our episode, it is now time for the Fantasy Court of Law. All right. So Addison, take it away with your points for Team Green and Team Black.
Yes, please. I love Fantasy Court of Law. All right. For Team Green, we finally actually have a Team Green. So there is something to talk about in this episode. So I have a couple of quick points for evidence that leads me to believe that Team Green does have a relatively decent claim on the throne. First is the most obvious. Aegon is the only living male heir of the king and has survived his infancy. It is a critical point that he is past the age of 2. I think in the realm in general, the sentiment is if you make it past the age of 2, you're probably going to continue to live. Of course, we know things happen, but overall, this is a good sign for his health and well-being. The second thing is, when Hightower talks to Alicent, he says, when you bore a son, you ended 15 years of uncertainty in the realm. This, to me, indicates that regardless of Rhaenyra being named as heir, there has still been continuing uncertainty throughout this entire time period because a male heir was not present. But we do now have a male heir, and this has had a very stabilizing effect on the realm. The third point is in the conversation with Jason Lannister that Lorraine talked about earlier, she mentions that the sentiment that Lannister portrays to the king is, oh, well, all the men, we kind of thought you were going to name Aegon as heir. And this to me is really important because we know that the Lannisters are a very, very powerful family. They have a lot of money. They have Casterly Rock. And so I'm trusting his impression to be relatively indicative of how the realm feels, or at least a lot of the major houses feel. And that implies to me that the overall sentiment and expectation is that Aegon should be named heir. I do think that they were genuine in swearing fealty to Rhaenyra until Aegon was born, because at the time there were no other options. And so they're like, well, it isn't a descendant of the king, even if it's not male. But now that Aegon is here, it's created uncertainty in a lot of the major houses.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we cannot ignore the scene between Viserys and Alicent in front of the bonfire, where the king outright admits that he named Rhaenyra in big part just to protect the realm from Daemon. So not necessarily indicating that he specifically wanted her, but she was a means to an end. And also that he didn't have any other option at the time. We cannot ignore that he didn't choose her over Aegon in real time, right? He honestly wasn't sure if he was going to get married, if he was going to be able to bear a son. I mean, assuming he's been trying to have kids for like 20 years with Aemma, and only one of his children have survived, not even a male, but just one of his children, I think it's highly likely that the king didn't ever expect to have a child. And so that's part of why he named Rhaenyra as an heir. So it leads me to believe that had the timeline been different, he probably wouldn't have named her. He just would have let Aegon be the heir. In addition to that conversation, he also repeats the dream that he's had, that he dreams of a male babe born with a conqueror's crown. So it shows that Viserys is still dwelling on this, right? He had this dream, he had this vision, and we know that visions and dreams are really important in this universe. And Viserys starts to show doubt. What if I'm wrong? What if I made the wrong decision? And so all those are more circumstantial evidence. They're not necessarily concrete evidence, but they point to this idea that the realm kind of expects Aegon to be named heir. Viserys kind of thinks that things are different. Maybe he could have named Aegon heir, and that the tides are sort of turning in favor of that.
Yeah, all good points. Although most of these things are just touch points to support why people would want Aegon to be heir, but it's not necessarily concrete, right? All these things.
Oh, great.
Especially the conversations between Alicent and Viserys. Again, we have this issue of things being discussed in private where nobody else is around. And so, if Alicent's the only one who's privy to this information, then again,
that's true.
But similarly between Viserys and Rhaenyra's conversations, it does open the door for misinterpretation or he said, she said situations because, these are all just kind of happening in the background. Nobody else is there to confirm or deny them. So,
yeah, absolutely. And for Team Black, can start with the obvious. Rhaenyra is still the heir. Same old there. Nothing has changed in that regard. There are 2 points to support Rhaenyra's claim. One is public, one is private. The first is in that conversation with Jason Lannister when he's trying to secure Rhaenyra as a wife and suck up to the king. He says, oh, I had thought, you're going to name Aegon. And Viserys gets very angry. And it's very, very specific that he named Rhaenyra as heir on purpose, not just because he didn't have a son. So that is a very public way to support Rhaenyra. And he did it to Jason Lannister, who is the head. I think he's the head of the house. I can't remember if his older brother is.
But he's...
But I mean, he's a prominent member of the Lannister household. So
yes,
he's important. He's going to tell people what was said, right? And then the second point is when Viserys and Rhaenyra have it out in their conversation. Through that conversation at the end, he says that he did waver at one time on naming her heir, but swears on her mother's memory that she will not be supplanted. Although, as we discussed, he does say it in private, but it is indicative of, despite his wavering at the hunt during the bonfire scene, that he does feel resolved that he named her heir on purpose and continues to support her claim to the throne.
And that concludes the bulk of our episode. And before we end it, of course, we have our favorite moments and scenes. Addison, would you like to share your favorite moments?
Yes, of course. So I just have 3 brief ones. I love when Rhaenyra runs off on the horseback after she gets all upset at her father, and Sir Criston Cole follows her. And they're talking, and she's just complaining about Jason Lannister and how he's a pig. And Criston goes, "Do you want me to kill him?" And I just thought that was really funny, because really Sir Criston Cole could absolutely do that. He could make it look like an accident. I absolutely love the scene where Rhaenyra and Sir Criston Cole are sitting on the hill overlooking the Kingswood, and the White Stag comes. It is just such a beautiful scene. The scenery, just the acting is really good, and just the symbolism of the stag coming and bestow his presence upon her, and the symbolism of the weight that carries. And I don't know, I just thought that was a really moving scene, especially for Rhaenyra's character. And last but not least, Shadow Daddy. I just love when Daemon pretends to surrender but then surprise attacks, and really just the whole battle scene in general, the dragons, everything. But just watching Daemon just do his thing, it was, I liked watching. Like, I'm starting to blush, but it was very entertaining to watch.
He's getting things done.
He is.
Things done.
Woo!
My favorite moments, I had 2 overlapping ones. I agree that I really liked when they saw the white stag and allows it to run free. To me, it really signifies that Rhaenyra is compassionate and merciful, but also the fact that I think it's a good omen for her. And then also Shadow Daddy Daemon going out there and being the bait and just ending it finally, like putting that whole situation to rest and getting shit done for sure. And then my third thing that I really liked was when Rhaenyra asks Lady Redwine what she would do, and like she just combats her and she's like, "And how have you served the realm, Lady Redwine? By eating cake." And then they just cut to the scene of the pug just eating cake off her plate. And then you also see Lord what was his name? I already
Lord
forgot.
Strong's son.
Yeah, Lord Strong's son. They see him and he's like, he's also like sitting there. Should I be eating this? Yeah, I'm eating cake too. And I just thought that was really funny. It was sassy, and I was like, what? You're right. You tell him. So
you're right. That is a great scene. I kind of forgot about that one, but now that you say it, I think I'm gonna add that to my favorites too. It was really good.
Yes. All right. We are done. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fantasy podcast. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, or share it with all your friends who love fantasy as well. If you would like to keep up with us on other platforms, then all of our socials are linked below in the episode description. And yeah, that's all we have for you guys today. Stay nerdy, everyone, and we'll catch you all next week for House of the Dragon, episode 4. Bye.
And when you talk about these shows out of context, it's weird as fuck.
It is so weird. Okay,
like, ugh. I was like, you know what? I was like, I'm gonna spice these up a little bit.
I can tell you're feeling sassy with these scripts today.
I really was. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna spice this shit up, baby. All right, Mom was